Good morning, everybody. How's everyone? Hopefully everyone's doing well. As Doug said, this is our favorite season. And it always is just such a joy and so humbling to be asked to speak. So I want to thank you all for always having me back. When Doug read the inspirational reading a second ago, I always think about something that one of my friends in the drama group once said to me when we were putting on a play. And they said that this moment will never happen again. We'll never have this play again. We'll never have this group of actors. We won't have this director. We won't have this music. This is unique and it'll never be reproduced again. So enjoy it, because when it's over, it will be over. And I think a lot about that in terms of our lives as well. If you think about your life as a road that you've been traveling on, all of our roads at this moment have come together in this space. And when this time together is over, they will go off again in different directions and come back together in certain places. But it always reminds us that enjoy the moments as we have them. So if you remember last time and the time before that, I told you that I wanted to do like a series that I called How to Be More Like You When They Want You to Be More Like Them. And so the first time I talked about how we use our own unique gifts to share with the world. And the second time I talked about how do you manage when you meet people that maybe you don't get along with, or that are people that are not people that you would necessarily click with. How do you manage that, and what do you take away from it? So this is the third time, thank you again, that I'm getting a chance to speak. And the title of my talk today, because many of you might remember that I'm a huge movie buff. So the title of my talk today is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? And many of you who are movie buffs might know that that was a famous movie, which I'll talk about in just a second. But before I talk about that, I want you to get your pad and pen out. And I have a question I want to ask you. So one of my favorite games that I always like to play, if I'm either with a new group of people, or even with old friends, I call it Fantasy Dinner Party. And in Fantasy Dinner Party, you have a table. You walk into a room, and it's either you or you're with your beloved. And there are spaces for 3 other people. Now, the dinner's been prepared, so you don't have to worry about cooking, which is great for me because I can't even boil water. So the dinner's all there. But like I just mentioned, it'll be the only time that you can get together with these people. And when the dinner's over, they will depart. Now, the interesting thing is that the people that you choose can be people from the past. They don't have to be alive. They can be alive, or they can be people that you imagine from the future. So it can be anyone, but you only have 2 hours to spend with them. And when the 2 hours is over, they will depart. So having said that, those are your instructions. Write down your 3 people that you would invite to your fantasy dinner party. Don't give it too much thought, just whoever pops into your mind. See people still writing. The good news is that every time I play this, I have different selections, which is good because it's interesting to see at any given point in time who you're thinking about, who you're gravitating towards. When I initially started thinking about this talk, I picked, many of you know, I've talked about Kate Bush. She's my favorite singer, so I would pick her. And I would probably pick, I played tennis for a long while, so I'd probably pick Chris Evert, because she was someone who, she wasn't always the strongest physically, but she had mental strength that helped her win. And then I thought I'd pick Mother Teresa, because I just want to know how it is to be that patient So those would be my three. But now that you have your three, let me talk for just a second about the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was quite a remarkable film. And so for those of you who don't know about it, it starred Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy as a married couple, and their daughter comes home for dinner one night, and they're planning for her to come home with someone that she has fallen in love with. And that turns out to be a Black man who is Sidney Poitier. And the thing that I always find remarkable about this film is that it was released in 1967 when interracial marriage was still illegal in 17 states. So it was really a groundbreaking film, and it was one that allowed people to maybe examine how they thought about it and see a different perspective of people's lives and what they might learn from that point. As Doug mentioned, when I was still in the corporate world, I got very interested in diversity and inclusion. It became something that I really started studying and thinking a lot about. And so you may have heard some of those terms, and I want to just talk a little bit about that. But first, I want to share with you a passage from a book that's called Traits of a Healthy Spirituality. And the passage goes like this. There's a great diversity among human beings. Physically, we differ from each other in things such as size and body structure, skin color, facial features, but we also differ from each other mentally, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. One of the challenges of a healthy spirituality is learning to tolerate the differences we find in one another and not view these differences as threats to ourselves, which often happens. Moreover, a healthy spirituality should lead us to celebrate our differences and see them as a reflection of God's beneficence and creativity. I just loved that. The differences and diversity are evidence of God's beneficence and creativity. That really, really spoke to me. And so when I first became involved in diversity, the terms that were used, or the phrase that was used, was DE&I, and that stood for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I thought, what are all those letters? What do those mean? So I just wanted to talk for a second about them. So diversity is essentially the composition of any group of people that you might be with. It could be in a spiritual setting. It could be in a work setting. It could be a group of friends that get together. And, it's really become an important topic in business right now, because a lot of times you'll walk into a boardroom and it will be filled with older, straight white men. Not to say that there's anything wrong with older, straight white men, but there is only one group of people that is together. And so the thought is, how can we think more about bringing diversity into the discussion? Again, it doesn't have to be business. It can be friends. It can be a church setting. And another thing that happens a lot of times when we talk about diversity is people think of groups of people, right? They'll think of women as a group of people, or Black people as a group of people, or LGBTQ as a group of people. And that will be the limit of what people think of as diversity. And really, there is a broader and bigger dimension to the question of diversity. Diversity is about a bunch more than that. I mentioned it earlier in the passage. It's about everything. It can be about how tall you are. It can be about your weight. It can be about the accent that you speak with, and how, as people, we can make assumptions based upon those things. And so diversity is about thinking about, as you are with a group of people, the uniqueness that they bring to the situation. And that really is the key of around diversity, is the different qualities that each one of us have. Now, the next letter I want to talk about for a second is inclusion, which is the I in the D, E, and I. And inclusion is just what you think it is. It's about how we are included in the conversation. So you could have a very diverse room. You could have a lot of different types of people in a room, but what sometimes can happen is that one or two or three of those people have the louder voice, are the ones whose ideas are always adopted. And those that are maybe are not as comfortable speaking, or maybe culturally they have grown up thinking that it's not, polite. I know when I visited Asia a lot of the Asian cultures tend to be more quiet because it's proper for them to wait and defer to the people that are more senior. So inclusion is about, you could have a room full of diverse people, but are you really hearing the perspectives that everyone brings to the table? And again, it can happen in board meetings. I know that a lot of nonprofit boards that I've been a part of, you'll have a different group of people around the table, but every time there's a question or something to talk about, it's the same group of people that offers up their opinion. And so inclusion is about being very mindful about who is in the room. Have they all had a chance to speak? If someone is not speaking, purposely giving them that opportunity so that they don't feel excluded or don't feel like their opinion is not important. And then the other thing that's super important is that once you hear differing opinions, even if you decide to do something different than someone suggested, explaining to them why the decision was made that was made. I know oftentimes in the corporate setting, I got frustrated because I'd have this idea that I thought was really fantastic, and I'd bring it up and then it shot down, and I didn't know why. I just thought that people thought it was stupid. But in reality, there could be 100 reasons why that particular idea isn't moving forward. So the idea is, when you think about inclusion, think about making sure that you are giving everyone the opportunity to be part of the conversation. And then the third letter I wanted to talk about in the D, E, and I is the E, which is equity. And equity has to do with who is a part of the conversation even in the first place. So where diversity is who's the group of people, and inclusion is, are those people included, equity is about who was even invited to the room in the first place, who had a chance to be in the room. I love a story. I got a chance to hear Barack Obama speak once, and he talked about that when he first got elected, and this happens with any president, you have to pick your cabinet, right? You pick your Secretary of Defense and your Secretary of Treasury and Housing and Urban Development, et cetera. And he said when he got there, he had everyone walking in and saying, here's your candidates for Secretary of Defense, here's your candidates for Treasury, Housing and Urban Development, et cetera. And he said, guess what? All the candidates for Secretary of Defense were older white men. All the candidates for Housing and Urban Development were Black women. And so he said, no, that's not how you think equitably about the playing field. I want you to go back and find a diverse group of people that I can look at so I can see different skill sets. And a lot of times that is something we have to actually go and do, right? It's about, are you actually going to different places to look for employees? Are you going, like when you're marketing for something, are you going and putting ads in different places so that you get diverse groups of people? This happened a lot for me in the corporate side with recruiting. Are we posting jobs in only one place that only attracts a certain type of people? And it happens a lot with churches. I know the play group that I'm a part of, every time we do a play, we put a poster together. And it struck me that, you know what, we hang those posters in the same exact places every time. And so what, guess what? We get the same exact people that come to the plays. And so we started challenging ourselves to say, where else can we hang this to get a different group of people and different experiences? And for us, also different reactions to the type of plays we were putting together and more thought and discussion around things. So equity is about that sense of who are you actually reaching out to in the first place? So that is that's what the D, E, and I means in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, while it has a lot of corporate references, it also really is important spiritually for us to think about, in tying in with Doug's passage, who are the people that are coming into our lives? Are we allowing those differences of opinion to be thoughtful to us, or are we only seeking out people that are going to have the same ideas, who are going to say yes to us when we have a conversation? And that is, for me, just a really powerful topic. I'm really big on analogies, as you all know. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I always liken it back to high school and the big dance in high school, whether it's prom or Sadie Hawkins or whatever that is the analogy of DE&I is, first of all, who knows about the big dance? Is it only for a certain group of people, or is it for everyone? Secondly, who is welcome or invited to the dance in the first place, right? Who is given an invitation to come? Then, while you're at the dance, who gets asked to dance? Are there a certain group of people that get asked to dance and others are sitting along the side? Or is everyone dancing? And then finally, what's the dance? You know, is everyone dancing the same thing, or are people allowed to dance the way they want to dance and show their unique selves? So that's an analogy that stuck for me, particularly because, you know, high school is not something I necessarily want to repeat, particularly when it comes to dances. But it's a unique way to think about it, and think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as unique terms. I do want to just mention an aside from a business standpoint. When I mention this in companies, you know, a lot of times companies will say, oh yeah, that's nice, that's the soft stuff, you know, whatever. But then when I stand up and I say, guess what? Women as a group have $4.3 trillion of buying power this year. Just this year, in 2022, women will be responsible for $4.3 trillion of spend. Hispanic people, 1.7 trillion, Black people, 1.5 trillion, millennials, 1.4 million. So it is important for our society as well that we're thinking about different groups of people. Now, again, because I want to be diverse, I don't want to leave any vowels out, right? So we've had D, E, and I, but I always like to add some other vowels because I think they're important. So I add the A, which A for me stands for accessibility. And accessibility is often thought of as people that are physically challenged. Like, as a organization, do you have a ramp to get into the building so that people are physically challenged can have access? But accessibility is really a much broader topic. It's accessible for people that have physical challenges, but it can also be accessibility for people that have mental challenges, or they have challenges with things like hearing or sight. It could be even challenges about things that they thought they were not allowed to be a part of. So I know that a lot of times people feel about religion or spirituality that because they've had a bad experience when they were younger, they're not welcome, that's not for them, that if they walked into a church or a spiritual center, that they would be ostracized or sit alone. And so accessibility is about feeling welcome whatever state you're in when you go into a place. And that's why I hope that any new visitors here or in any place feel welcome. And hopefully we all have open minds to welcome new people wherever they're coming, whatever point of view they walk into a space with, they are welcome. My next vowel I want to talk about is U. And U is a really important topic, something I've learned a lot about, which is unconscious bias. And I don't know if anyone's heard that term before, unconscious bias. Because when you say to yourself, hey, I'm biased, that sounds bad, doesn't it? You don't want to feel like, oh, I'm biased or I have prejudices. No one wants to feel that way or feel like they're excluding others. And that's why it's called unconscious bias, because it's something we all have. We have all grown up the way we've grown up. We've all been on the journeys in life that we've been on. And because of that, we have certain notions, certain things that we've learned, certain things that our parents taught us, or certain things that we've heard either through the media or our companies taught us to do things a certain way. But that is ingrained in us. And it's something that we need to be a lot more conscious of. Now, you might say to yourself, well, if it's unconscious, how do I be more conscious of it? And that's why it's just important to be aware of things, and also important that we speak up about things when we see them in a nice, polite way, of course, but just bring them to people's attention. And I'll give you an example, because this is one that is something that I've done before, and Doug has mentioned it to me. I'm like, yeah, I do that. So when I was growing up, my grandmother, which is my mom's mom, was hard of hearing. She got scarlet fever when she was young and lost a large portion of her hearing. And so she always wore hearing aids. But, in the earlier days, hearing aids were not perfect. And so when I would talk to my grandmother, I would purposely raise my voice so that she could hear me. I would talk a lot louder. I'd look her straight in the face. I'd talk to her loud just so that she could hear me. And guess what? That was something I learned as a young child. And I found myself later on in life that anytime I saw someone who was older, who maybe had white hair like my grandmother, I would talk loud to them. I would look at them and I would just, hi, how are you today? How's it going? And Doug would say, you're shouting at that person. You don't really need to shout at them. And I said, I'm not shouting. And then I'd find out that yes. And I'm like, why am I shouting at you? Why am I shouting? I'm like, because that's what I always did. It's something I learned. And I unconsciously, that was who I was. And I figured it out. And then so Doug said, you really need to work on that, because you're, as he mentioned earlier, my voice carries, but it really used to carry when I was talking to elderly people. And even in the workplace, I would do that to some of my employees who were older. And so it can be offensive. It can make people feel, uncomfortable or sad. But the great news is that now that I know that, now that someone pointed it out to me, now that I'm aware, I can be more conscious of it. Does it mean I don't still do it a lot? I still find myself doing it. But at the same time, I'm now aware of it. And so that's where we can all help one another if we see ourselves doing something like that. And again, don't just think of it as the specific groups of people, but it can be anything. It can be things like talking loud. It's that unconscious bias that we just have to be really, really careful. And it's really something that through discussion, through thought, through hearing other people's stories, that it becomes much more conscious to us. So that's the U. And then let me talk then. Oh, before I go to the next one, which is O, I do want to share with you a Buddhist prayer that talks a lot about diversity that I found that I really liked. And so it's really short. It goes like this. May I mindfully appreciate the diversity of every being that I encounter, who, like flowers, bring beauty, variety, and sustenance to the world. that beautiful? Beauty, variety, and sustenance. We're all important and in our uniqueness. So the final vowel, which I think is probably the most important vowel, is O, which for me, O stands for openness. And that's, again, to me, the most important vowel, because again, it's about our willingness to really talk to people, to see differences in people, to be willing to hear other perspectives, and not to have that preconceived notion. I know that in the past couple years, with everything that has been going on in the world, there's been a lot of divisiveness. We've all seen that. We've all done things. I'm sure I've done it, blocked people on Facebook because they have opinions that are different than mine, and they can be really mean. And I just feel like, oh, I hate you. I'm going to block you. And I don't want to hear what you have to say at all. And what I found, again, for myself is turning everything off that was different from my beliefs, and not stopping to say, all right, there's a different perspective here. Maybe I don't agree with it, but can I at least understand where people are coming from? So I think in this world that has gotten divisive, the more that we can, again, not necessarily agree with people, but just listen to their points of view, and we at least can then understand the other side, and maybe build bridges that get us closer to those folks. And maybe people will do that with us. And I think that really is important in an open environment. Now, I know in my previous talks, I've talked about crystals, because one of the things that I've become a lot more open to, and I owe this to Doug, is spirituality. You know, I used to think of religion as being, you know, you go to church, and I'm, you know, very Christian. I have Christian beliefs, but other people have Buddhist beliefs and Jewish, and there's all different types of beliefs. And so I learned a lot more about spirituality, and I've really started studying crystals because I have a friend who started this crystal business. So I've tried to bring up a crystal in each one of my talks. And so I looked to see if there was a crystal that was about that was about diversity. And so there is a crystal. It's called Trolite, which is this crystal here. It's kind of a beautiful black. It's got gray, almost some purple specks in it. And Trolite as a crystal, let me make sure I get this right, is one that allows us to expand our awareness of information and accept that information into our spirituality and into our lives. So Trolite is the crystal that I put with me today so that I would be able to talk better about the subject. So I have to tell you, one of the things that we did in my workplace, we started something called employee resource groups. I don't know if you've ever heard of those. They're evolving in companies, and they're groups of like-minded people that can get together and talk about issues that are important to them. And the great news is they've had a really strong impact on shaping like HR policies. I know that there was a group of men who had got together that were talking and really said, why don't we have the same paternal leave that women have with maternal leave? That's really important to us. You know, a lot of people just assume that the man in the family is going to work all the time, and that is not concerned about their kids, and that the women are concerned about their kids. I mean, that is pervasive in corporate America. And so this group of men got together, and they were successful in adding paternal leave to the company. And I'll never forget, because I helped start the LGBTQ group, but I'll never forget that I had a gentleman come up to me, and he said, would you be one of our executive sponsors for our employee resource group? And I said, sure. What is the group? And he said, it's the Black Employee Resource Group. And I kind of said, well, I'm not Black. I mean, why would I be your executive sponsor? And he said, because we want someone in a position that can hear our viewpoints that's different than us. We can preach all day to the people that are like us. We want someone who's different from us to hear our points of view. And we want to get your ideas of what we can do to be more visible in the company. And I thought that was so powerful that just that someone was thinking so differently. And, ironically, the LGBTQ group didn't ask me to be their sponsor because I guess I couldn't teach them anything about being gay. But it was really a fascinating thing for me. So now I have the second part of your task, which is now, given everything I've said about diversity, about equity, about inclusion, about uniqueness in this world, about people that we may not know a lot about, turn your paper over and think who you would invite. You have to pick 3 different people that you could learn from, a different point of view, a different perspective, and really someone that could teach you something that aids in your journey going forward. So take a moment and pick 3 different people for your fantasy dinner party. So I'm going to share with you, I did the same thing. I picked 3 different people. So I picked Winston Churchill because I thought to myself, given all that's going on politically and everything, what must it have been like for Winston Churchill to face World War II, to face what was going on, to understand what the beliefs were of everyone at the time. What would he say to me he could have done different, and what could I learn from that? The second person I picked was a favorite author of mine, Agatha Christie, because she grew up in the 1920s when the publishing world was filled with men. And she got started because her sister challenged her to write a detective story. She didn't think that Agatha could do it. And so her sister challenged her. And so she went on to become, if many of you don't know this, the 3rd most published author in the world of all time. She's 3rd behind, the first is the Bible, and the second is William Shakespeare, and the 3rd is Agatha Christie. But I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to talk to her about what it was like to, as a woman, struggle to get into the publishing industry? And then where did she come up with all these incredibly creative ideas? And then the 3rd person I picked was someone from the future. I picked the person that first would figure out how to live somewhere off of the earth, because eventually the earth won't be sustainable anymore. And someone's going to have to figure that out. So I'd love to know what they would think about. So those were my 3. I'm sure you have a great different 3. And again, Doug, I promised I wouldn't call on anyone, but hopefully you'll get a chance to reflect. Your first 3 weren't wrong. And your second 3 aren't wrong. It's just a different perspective. Maybe you can share that with your spouse or your loved one, and have a discussion about it. And remember that all of us are unique and different. And as we go forward in our path in life, the more we can be open, the better. I want to close with a prayer by Brother David Steinel Rast, who wrote a book called God Has No Religion, which I loved. And if you'll just bow your heads, I'll say this prayer for us, which is the following. You, the one from whom on different paths all of us have come, to whom on different paths all of us are going, make us strong in our hearts that unites us, build bridges that divide us. United, make us rejoice in our diversity and at one in our witness to your peace and a rainbow to your glory. And so it is. Thank you, everyone.